Hello and welcome to the presentation on Chapter 2 of the International Levee Handbook. I'm Michael Wallis from HR Wallingford in the UK and I was the lead author for this chapter of the handbook. In this short presentation I will try to give just a flavour of the content of the chapter by way of an introduction to some of its aspects. This chapter, Levees in Flood Risk Management, is divided into four main sections. 2.1, Managing Flood Risk. 2.2, Measures and Instruments for Flood Risk Management. Section 2.3 is on levee management. And 2.4 on roles and responsibilities in levee management. The chapter sets levees in the broader context of flood risk management and introduces the general frameworks and principles for their management and use that are used throughout the handbook. Together with Chapter 3, it provides the foundation on which the rest of the chapters build and provide more detailed information. The principles of risk and flood risk management are explained in Section 2.1. Setting these in the context of the wider environment. Generic frameworks are illustrated and described for flood systems, flood risk management processes, and flood risk identification, analysis and assessment. Causes of and responses to changes in flood risk are also discussed. Although this handbook is primarily about the management of levees for flood risk reduction, it is appropriate to place levees in the wider context of flood risk management. The management of levees must be seen alongside a broader range of activities such as land use planning and emergency preparedness that help to reduce flood risk. The process of flood risk management is about a sequence of first identifying flood risk, then assessing the level of risk, and finally about creating policies and plans to control the risk and to reduce it to an acceptable level. Flood risk can change over time. The causes of changes to flood risk can either be drivers, such as climate change, or responses in the form of measures and instruments that are used to control or mitigate flood risks. Both of these affect the whole source pathway set of flooding system, and so will affect flood risk. Change in flood risk can also be viewed as a probability, consequence or impact space. This figure shows how risk drivers can increase not only the probability component of flood risk, such as climate change and defence deterioration, but also the consequence component of risk, for example through urban development. The extent to which the impact of these various changes is taken into account in the planning, design and management of flood management systems is generally a matter of national policy. In the context of developing flood risk management policy, Section 2.2 of the ILH discusses structural and non-structural flood risk reduction measures, financial and regulatory instruments, formulating portfolios of options for reducing risk, and also the appraisal of those options. There is a wide range of structural and non-structural measures available to reduce the probability of flooding, the magnitude of the flood itself, or the impact level of the inundation. It is perhaps easier to think of them according to the source pathway receptor flood model. For example, source control includes measures that reduce the likelihood of floods occurring, such as spatial planning and land use policies that affect rainfall retention in catchments, sustainable drainage systems, and options that affect the rate of drainage of waters into rivers. There are also options for modifying flood pathways that can influence propagation of waters if the waters do rise, such as gates and barriers, diversion channels, and property level protection measures. There are also measures that can be applied to influence the resilience of those who might be affected by flooding, such as flood warning and forecasting services, controls on building and land development, and flood event contingency planning. Section 2.3 of the Levee Handbook explains how performance objectives, safety standards and functional objectives for levees are used to deliver the aims of flood risk mitigation policies. A management framework for the life cycle of levees is defined, and the section introduces approaches to levee asset management, including assessments and reviews of levee performance and reliability and techniques for failure analysis. A generic levee management cycle has been constructed to be applicable whatever the national governance arrangements. The life cycle diagram makes it clear that in the case of a new levee, the normal entry point to the cycle would be from a definition of policy and functional objectives, i.e. from the top of the diagram. In the case of an existing levee, one would enter the levee management life cycle within the routine operational cycle. Changes to existing policy and management objectives, or an event that changes the level of flood risk reduction, might take the manager outside this loop in order to consider alterations to an existing levee, such as improving, rebuilding or decommissioning the structure. However, these activities would normally be considered as being part of the routine levee management life cycle. In all cases, diversion to the inner emergency management loop is triggered either by damage due to a severe flood event or as a result of an assessment indicating that the levee is not likely to perform as expected. Section 2.4 discusses the roles and responsibilities of those involved in managing levees and levee systems, including authorities, regulators, managers, designers and engineers. Chapter 2 also includes examples of national policy and regulatory instruments which define flood risk management in different countries and devolve roles and responsibilities to the relevant and responsible authorities. The importance and means of the communication of risks to the wider public and local community is also discussed, along with the importance of educating and empowering local communities. It is important to effectively communicate risk and residual risk of flooding with communities that could be directly or indirectly impacted by a flood event. Communication about the nature of risks serves many important purposes and is a crucial part of the flood risk management plan involving levees. Although risk communication does not directly affect the physical performance of a levee system, it is integral to emergency operations and efficient evacuation. Communities need to be provided with accurate information and clear explanation of circumstances and warnings about potential events. Risk can often be communicated through the variety of probabilistic risk and performance metrics that are also useful for risk management decision making. However, the use of specialist risk terminology when communicating the level of flood risks offered by any defence structure can often cause problems. The use of terms such as 1 in a 100-year event outside of the flood risk management industry can often lead the public to believe that this means they are free from flood risks within their lifetime. This is a common misunderstanding of probability and of risk. Successful risk communication is difficult to achieve, and it will frequently be necessary to engage diverse groups through various media. These audiences may hold different values and have different levels of understanding, and the interpretation of a message can be dependent on a variety of social factors. So communication objectives should be clearly defined with the goal of engaging stakeholder groups at all points in the risk management process. As a general rule, the messages should be kept simple and straightforward. The general public, decision makers and local authorities may not have the time or the inclination to understand probabilities and statistics when they have many other concerns in daily life. One of the most important points to convey is that despite the introduction of measures such as levees to reduce it, there is still a risk of flooding. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope it has given you a flavour of the coverage of Chapter 2 and encourages you to investigate the other chapters of the International Levee Handbook, which have similar presentations. The complete handbook can be downloaded from the Syria website, the link to which is given on the current slide. Thank you for listening.